where my work is important to this conversation, back in 2006, as a first-term president, I was immediately confronted with the existential threat of climate change. Our elders and our fishermen said we had millions of sockeye salmon in our Quinault River in the 50s and 60s. The year I got elected, we only had 3,000 return. And as I pressed our scientists as to why, in just one lifetime, we went from millions to just 3,000, I learned about ocean acidification. I learned about ocean warming temperatures. I took a helicopter flight, saw the glacier in the Olympic Mountains that feeds the mighty Quinault completely disappeared, the Anderson Glacier. And I was confronted with 2.5 miles of dead marine life on our ocean due to oxygen depletion on the ocean floor. A lot of things were happening for a young president with no political experience whatsoever. And I started to engage others in this conversation about climate change, and I found it incredibly frustrating that I could not have a single substantive conversation at a tribal level, a state, or even federal level. At that time, I would raise the issue of climate change, the room would get quiet, and then someone would change the subject. During the 2008 presidential election, I was waiting for someone to say the words climate change in the debates. And I remember watching the debates. Not once was the issue of climate change raised. Obama was elected that year, and I decided I'm going to leave the country and go to Poznan, Poland for COP14. That was my first conference of parties session. It was after Obama was elected, but before he was sworn in, so there was a great deal of hope and optimism that the United States was finally going to come to the table. The following April, he sent a special envoy to Bonn, Germany, to basically announce to the world that there's simply no political will inside the United States. You can't expect much out of our country at this point, even though we had a president who believed in climate change and wanted to do the work. So it was in that moment, in my first term, that I realized we have to go outside of the United States. We have to rise above the partisan politics, rise above the distraction, the noise, the dissent, the disbelief, the politics of it, to find other leaders throughout the world. And so it was in those moments that I began to understand that the value of Indigenous peoples is indispensable to some of these challenges. John Kerry, the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, addressed the National Congress of American Indians and made the statement, "The future of humanity and the future of the planet is inextricably tied to Indigenous peoples having a seat at the leadership table." And so after decades of doing this work, it was quite clear to me that we need to bring this conversation to bear. At home, we went after the fossil fuel industry and priced carbon in an initiative called I-1631. The Western States Petroleum Association dropped $33 million to kill that campaign in Washington State, Shell, Exxon, etc. We came back, passed the Climate Commitment Act, 10% of all carbon revenues dedicated to tribal nations. At the same time, as president of NCAI, we advanced the Inflation Reduction Act and secured $500 million for tribal nations. But when you divide that among 500 nations, it's less than $1 million. And it's nowhere near the scale of what we need. We need 500 million just to move our villages to higher ground. So another point was very clear to me. In the public space, public finance is only paying for the symptoms of climate change. The hurricanes, the tornadoes, the megafires. And so I heard and followed and was part of the U.S. delegation with John Kerry, and I could hear the conversations. We need money, we need resources, we need public, private, philanthropic, blended capital at global scale if we're going to implement and execute any of this work. And so 2 years ago, I left politics to enter this world of global climate finance, and I'm finding there are a number of truths that people understand about Indigenous peoples. One, everyone understands that we're on the front lines of climate change, that we had little to nothing to do with the problem, but yet we are disproportionately impacted. Others know we have incredible Indigenous knowledge that we could bring to the table. But this morning in these opening reflections, I really want to impress the point that we can bring Indigenous knowledge to innovative capital markets and innovative finance. And what a concept, right? When I initially started doing this work, I felt I am way out of my comfort zone. I don't know nothing about private equity. I don't know nothing about venture capital. I don't know nothing about a lot of these important mechanisms. But I was invited to join the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Natural Capital. And the mission of the WEF's GFC on natural capital was to mainstream nature into capital markets. And I started understanding and learning over the first year how countries like China have introduced a gross ecosystem product, a GEP, to complement their GDP. I learned the United Nations has an accounting mechanism that 90 countries have adopted to put nature on the balance sheet. So all around the world, there are these innovative finance ideas of valuing nature, of putting nature on the balance sheet, and of trading nature. So I thought, I think this is a world I can bring Indigenous knowledge and help create these innovative finance mechanisms and structures. Well, about a year ago, I had an epiphany moment after hearing all the conversations of hearing private capital market actors saying, we've deployed billions of dollars, but what came back wasn't exactly what we were sold. So there's somewhat of a chilling factor. There's window dressing and greenwashing, and so now, but there's still an appetite for capital markets to deploy investment into nature. And the moment a year ago that I realized that this simply isn't going to work, I thought these status quo markets by design are intended to maximize profit at the expense of nature, maximize profit at the expense of humanity, maximize profit at the expense of the planet. They're simply inherently incongruent with our values as Indigenous peoples, and it's never going to work. So the next point and question I had in my mind was, what do we do about that? The answer and the initiative that I'm working on inside the WEF is we need to reimagine finance platforms and exchange and systems where we could bring together global, public, private, philanthropic investment at global scale in an Indigenous-led and designed finance platform and exchange. Imagine a system, not the status quo system, not Wall Street, not the exchanges in London or Tokyo, but systems where investment strategies actually follow ecological thresholds, and where they actually follow planetary survival, where we could rise above these systems where everything is just a cost of doing business, and fiduciaries have to maximize profit. Well, I'm starting to see inside these finance systems a glimmer of hope. Just this month, JP Morgan issued a report on tipping points. And how do global financial markets and capital markets incorporate tipping points into financial strategies? And I would encourage everyone to Google that report and check out that report. They talk about things like there's very low probability of an event happening, but when it happens, it's disastrous and it could cause global economic disruption. Well, we're seeing those type of ruptures in the financial markets all over the planet. We're starting to hear and understand issues of food security. We're starting to hear and understand issues of national security. We're starting to hear and understand all these disruptions to the global finance system. The solution is returning to a system where there's a different definition of wealth, of value. And I want to thank everyone in this room for the work that you are doing, because the work that you are doing is going to accelerate our ability to gain investment from those who are so desperately wanting a return on their financial dollars, on their investment, on their strategies, where there is no solution. And I'm starting to understand there are two distinct conversations. There's a conversation about environmental risk, and that's things like hurricanes, tornadoes, mega fires. And there's a conversation about finance risk and things that I just described. But these two conversations are not happening together. They're happening in silos. But if we could take a sector, like the sector that we're going to be hearing and advancing this week, and we could bring together those conversations and talk about real solutions, talk about investment and innovation, talk about partnerships where we can actually rise above the political fray. And when I heard Antonius's 2 questions that we're trying to solve, how are we trying to solve these private markets that are drying up? And how do we solve, this other challenge that we're facing? There is a path forward. And I just want to encourage everyone throughout the next 2 days that there is a path. It's emerging. It's promising, and it's not something that's new and innovative. Well, for many it might seem, but for Indigenous peoples, the value of nature has been something that has been passed down through centuries, and it's something that's embedded in our DNA. And while some might think Indigenous peoples are weak and vulnerable and on the front lines of climate change, I beg to differ. We are strong, we are resilient, we possess centuries of ancestral knowledge and wisdom, and we are here at the table with some of the best scientists in the world who could see things beyond even human imagination. Yesterday I was at Carbon Run, and I told the folks there, 15 years ago, I thought there's an unimaginable future where there's innovative things that we haven't even thought of that's going to come to bear. And I would just encourage everyone in this room this week, bring your very best heart, your very best mind, and your very best spirit. And as we all rise above the burning planet and the burning political landscape and the division and the chaos and the dissension, we could all find ourselves in a place where we could join. And the beauty of a seized opportunity, it multiplies, it creates momentum, and it creates a movement. And I see that happening here at Carbon to Sea, and I'm so very grateful and honored to be part of this conversation because you provide a solution. You are on the front lines. We have everything in this room to make all the difference in the world. And we are going to accept the challenge and together spend the next 2 days. So on behalf of my nation, my ancestors, future generations yet to be born, I am so very grateful for your dedication, your wisdom, your strength, your tenacity. And I look forward to spending the next 3 days with you. Siaukwea.